Just wanted to get the grass out. In Rwanda, it's more likely to be red mud. I once saw a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine in which there was a hippie who had obviously gotten into the meditation trip well enough to be able to levitate a rug. He was sitting on this rug with his yogic position, looking very transcendental, and he was elevated about 50 feet above a slum. And he was chanting, I suppose, Aum Mani Padme Hum or something. And below him there were muggings and robberies and poverty and all sorts of things. And I often thought about that cartoon afterwards, how our scholarship and our spirituality, in a way, can easily transcend and in so doing be uprooted from the reality of the world that we live in. And the thing that I've been so encouraged about this conference is that we seem to be grounded in the world. We seem to be alive and living in a world that is suffering and even willing to suffer with it. When we talk about intervening in the affairs of other peoples, other societies, for the purpose of aiding their development, it's a pretty pretentious concept. Somebody the other day said, well, what do you think you're doing? You're playing God. And an answer came to me that I thought was a bit pretentious, but I said it just popped out, how those things do. I said, well, I'm just not playing God. I'm just going because He sent me there. I'm His representative. And in a way, Bahá'í Abdu'l-Wahhab says, ye are the physicians of mankind. Well, I remember when I was in Rwanda trying to explain, somebody asked us, what's religion for anyway? Now, these people had a history, 700, 800 years of a very established, very strong society before the white man came, with a prophet named Ryangombe, who taught them that there was only one God, that there was only one way to get to God, and that was through these special messengers that came from God. And he gave them laws and social teachings that would help them to establish a civilization. And they followed these laws and social teachings until the white man came with the Christian missionaries, and then the missionaries told them, well, Jesus Christ is out, and Ryangombe is out, and Jesus Christ is in. And they all went, oh, okay. Because they could see that the patterns were very similar, and they didn't have much trouble accepting one or the other. It seemed to be, to them, the same religion. So in that country, 95% of the people espouse to be Roman Catholics. But when you walk into the hills and you say, do you believe in Ryangombe? Oh, yes, of course. The Western industrial value system is encroaching. The market system is encroaching. Christianity has come in. But very profoundly there is the life world of a people that goes way, way back in history. And yet, important changes came to those people. And important changes are coming again to those people, as they are coming to all peoples in the world, through intervention. Somebody came there at one time or another. There was a nut named Noah who lived on the top of a hill and built a boat. And everybody looked at him and asked him what he was doing until the rain started to fall, and then they took a different song. I remember someone wrote me a letter once, a Baha'i community in Rwanda, who were desperate because the local government officials wouldn't give them any land to build a Baha'i center on. And they wanted me to argue with the local administrator about the worth of the Baha'i faith, how it was doing something for the country. And I never really thought about it before. I just took it for granted that the Baha'i faith was building a new world order. Then I started to think about what local spiritual assemblies are doing in terms of training people to make decisions on a community level, about bringing together factions of communities, families that had feuded in a feudal system for 150, 200, 500 years. Women who had never had a voice in the affairs of the community suddenly standing up and being heard and listened to. You could make a very long list of things that people were learning how to do that were very important in the process of developing community and carrying on development projects. And I just wrote all this stuff down, and I sent it to the administrator. And I heard I visited the area a little later. And the administrator had so turned over his understanding of what the Baha'is were about that he not only gave them the permission to finish their local center, But he encouraged them to carry on an adult education program, which they did without any help from the outside. They put in a literacy program because somebody there could read. And the burgomaster, the local authority, required every adult male who could not read to go there once a week to the Baha'i Center and learn to read. And the Baha'is became the focal point of a new development impetus in that community. And it was really the local spiritual assembly, unaided by anybody at all from the outside, who, in their study of the writings and in their understanding of what it was to be a Baha'i, took that on and did that. Now, subsequently, I came back to Canada and went to school in the field of development studies generally. And I read into a lot of the questions that were so well displayed before us this morning, so ably by our speakers, especially by Dr. Arbab, in the end of his talk, when he gave that long list of questions that we have to resolve, we have to face. How are we going to deal with the cultural history of people that were enslaved in a colonial process? Or how are we going to handle a market system that in some ways corrupts and in some ways aids the development of people? On and on questions go like that. And these are questions that the literature and development have been asking and continue to ask. But I went back to my experiences in Rwanda and I thought how already we the Baha'is have something like 25,000 Baha'i communities in the world where the fundamental processes that begin a process of people coming together to improve the quality of their own lives, the lives of their family, the life of their nation, it's already going. And as we stand on the brink of perhaps a new era in service to the world of humanity, where we begin to take on the material garment of visibility in the world as the Baha'i faith works, I began to ask myself, what are some of the essential components of what we're already doing? What do the writings say to us about how we have to go about carrying on the turning about of the consciousness of humanity? I really love that image that Linda gave us, coming from Tiril de Chardin, where the face of humanity is emerging. What a beautiful image. It's been obscured to its own self, and it's now coming forward. Humanity is beginning to know its own mind, its own heart, know that it is an entity. Well, I thought, where do we have an example of how to intervene in the affairs of man? Well, we have the example of God intervening in the affairs of man. And it's from this idea that God intervenes from time to time in the affairs of man that I draw the rest of this paper. The covenant is a concept that describes man's continuous relationship to a developing being. God's continuous relationship to a developing being. Man, we're the developing being. From time to time, there's an insertion into our affairs. And something then happens. And I want to look now at what I found to be some of the aspects of that insertion, of that intervention in the affairs of man. And I want to suggest that this could be the beginnings, at least, of building a model for any kind of development enterprise. Here in Canada, we've undertaken a national teaching program where people are forming teams all across the country. It's only beginning, really. People are forming the teams and they're beginning to pray and deepen. It's a community development project. We're talking about transforming the nation, but it's really only beginning. And I suggest that some of the things that we talk about in international development, we could also learn to practice here at home. I think that this model might be applicable, especially in the precise stage of development that we're at in bringing about Baha'i education programs, such as the various schools and rural development projects we're talking about. And after these several conferences here in Ottawa and in Montreal, I hope to go and work in that, perhaps in the Haiti school, and to try out some of these principles, to begin in action, as Dr. Arbab suggests, to try to test the wisdom of the commands that we've been given. Here are 5 words. And these 5 words will provide a little bit of a sort of an outline, hooks to hang concepts on for the rest of this presentation. First concept is love. Love is the ground upon which we stand. So it's like a fish lives in water, we live in love. And love is the foundation of unity and harmony. It's what makes it all possible. I'll talk about that further because I think it has real practical applications to how we can go about being a catalyst in a development process, either as institutions or as individuals. Second word is volition, which I link with the word participation. Third is intervention, but of a catalytic nature. Next comes contract. The covenant is a contract. All of these things are drawn from aspects of the covenant as I see it. And the last thing is the covenant presents to us a vision of human possibility. I'll deal with each of those now. The ground of our relationship with God, according to Baha'u'llah, is love. I knew my love for thee, hence I created thee. Engraved on thee mine image, and revealed to thee my beauty. He knew his love for us, so he created us. Do we know our love for the people that we want to go and work with? But he doesn't stop there. He adds, wherefore do thou love me? He wants a reciprocal kind of a relationship to go on. Love me, that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. There's an exchange of love that has to go on. Maybe this love is an often overused word, but listen to how Abdu'l-Baha refers to it. He gives it a lot of dimensions that we don't hear in Coca-Cola commercials. Love is the one means that ensures the felicity of both this world and in the next. Love is the supreme law that rules this mighty and heavenly cycle. The sole power that binds together the divine elements of this material world. Material world. The physicists are looking for that power. Sometimes they've been calling it gravity, now they're asking if it exists. The supreme magnetic force that directs the movements of the spheres in the celestial realms. That's gravity. Love reveals with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries of life within the beautified body of mankind. Isn't that what we want to do? Latent within the reality of mankind are potentialities that need to be revealed. And this, Abdu'l-Baha tells us, love reveals those potentialities. Abdu'l-Baha says, it's certain that the greatest instrumentality for achieving the advancement and glory of man is love and fellowship and unity, and that nothing can be effectuated without them. So, what I want to say is that the first principle, the first thing that has to happen if we want to carry on a development project, carry on an education project, carry on teams, teaching teams, any kind of a group activity, is that we have to establish love and unity among the members. Abdu'l-Baha speaks about this in relationship to assemblies, that only once love and unity and harmony have been established can anything else take place. Now clearly that kind of work takes time. Genuine transformation of the human heart is not something that will come overnight. The author of The Aquarian Conspiracy, that's a popular book today, Marilyn Ferguson, says that each of us guards a gate of change that can only be unlocked from the inside. So somehow, we're all standing behind that barred door of our heart, waiting for the friend to come in. What has this all got to do with the practical problem of, well, improving my income or improving my health or having my children be better educated? Well, unless we're able to work together in a way that moves away from the distrust and the fear and the suspicion of centuries of history, unless we're able to find a way to see ourselves emerging as a people together, we cannot progress, Abdu'l-Baha says. Hadst thou spent all the riches of the earth, thou couldst not have united their hearts. But God hath united them. That's what is written in the Quran. So, I think that development projects need to begin where there are consolidated, unified Baha'i communities, or at least the beginnings of these things, where there's the seed of caring, where there's the seed of trust that's already been planted. I'll leave that point aside, but I want to come back to it. The second principle, the second word, was volition. The attainment of any object is conditioned upon knowledge, volition, and action. Unless these three conditions are forthcoming, there is no execution or accomplishment. Many people today think that if we can only diffuse Western technology, attitudes, values, skills, if we can diffuse them to the poor nations of the world, that really the problems that people face all over the world would be alleviated. And it may be so, but it may not be so also. It seems to me that what has to happen is a process of transformation. And it may be that you may know what is good for my village. You may know, for example, if you come to Ecuador, or you come to Haiti, or you come to Rwanda, you may know what might constitute better sanitation, or a higher rate of literacy, or how to carry those things off, or a higher productive agricultural rate. You may have the technologies, the skills, you may have the knowledge to operationalize all of those goals. But unless I want those changes to take place, volition, my will is operative in that, the changes are not going to take place. They're not going to happen. Therein lies the essential component of participation in development. Now, development literature is enumerating the importance of participation, and they're saying that from the very beginning of any kind of a process in a community, you have to involve the people who are supposed to be the subjects of development. The people who are supposed to be benefited from the process should be involved right from the beginning in assessing the needs of the community, in developing a research program that looks into who are we, where have we been, where are we going, how do we get to be the way we are, what do we really value in our life, what kind of a story do we think we're in, what are we acting out, what sort of a drama, what do we live for, what do we hope for in our children. That kind of knowledge about ourselves as a people is important because it helps to determine the goals that we're going to set. What comes first, a water system or the education of my children, or improving my income? How do we arrange things so that everybody's together and can move forward? The people who are in the area that, in the village or in the community or in the region that are being developed need to be incorporated into the planning process. They need to be the ones who are themselves implementing the project all the way through. They need to be the ones who evaluate whether it was a good project or a bad project, and the ones who feed back into a new cycle of research and analysis and planning and implementation. Now, that's not something that's easy to do. I've tried myself. In Rwanda, we tried to implement religious instruction in about 25 or 30 communities that spread out to about 100 communities. And then literacy and basic cultural and health and sanitation instruction. And we trained people. And as hard as we tried to make it not be a top-down thing, people came to us in workshops and institutes, and they wanted to know how it was that they could carry on their tutorial school, how it was that they could consult with their local spiritual assembly. And we tried to give answers that came out of consultation, came out of a dialogue. And still, as I look back on it, I feel that it was much, much too top-down. And it wasn't much less a collaborative, cooperative arrangement that allowed for the full participation of people than it was really needed. And I think to the extent that there was participation, there was success. Because people were able to will to know God, to will to love one another, to will to progress, which is an essential step, Baha'u'llah says. Knowledge, to know what to do, to know how it all is, has to be linked with action, but the link is volition, is participation. And those of us who know, because we've been educated and we come from somewhere else, we know, can absolutely abort, disrupt the development process, can undermine the potential growth of a people simply by short-circuiting that potentiality for participation. Now, one more word is, in the realm of participation, is about women. When we talk about the participation of a community or the participation of people, a lot of places in the world that means the men. I mean, if you go to a meeting and you want to talk about agricultural development, you want to talk about schools, you want to talk about anything, the women are too busy working to come to the meetings. So the men come to the meeting, and they listen to you, and they talk with you, and they all become Baha'is, and the women don't have time to come to the meetings, and they'll say, well, my wife will be a Baha'i too. Or, well, 50% of the people who need to participate, at least 50%, are women. And we need to address ourselves to the specific problems and challenges and potentialities that women can help us with in the development process. So one thing I would say that as a part of this component of participation, of volition, the volition and the participation of women has to be engaged. It's absolutely essential. And as Baha'is, we'd really be remiss to leave that one out. The third word was intervention itself, catalytic intervention. And, there's one group of people, I think, comes out of classical anthropology, who says, leave them alone and they will come home. That people are in their pristine, beautiful cultural state, and you should just leave them be. And if we would just only leave them alone and stop messing with them, that they could come along and develop. Well, my reading of what happens with God's intervention in the affairs of man is He doesn't leave us alone. And thank God He doesn't leave us alone. From time to time, there is an intervention. That the energies, he says, Baha'u'llah says, with which the day star of divine bounty and source of heavenly guidance hath endowed the reality of man, lie latent within him. Even as the flame is hidden within the candle, and the rays of light are potentially present in the lamp. Then he goes on to say, neither the candle nor the lamp can light itself by its own unaided efforts. So I think there's a justification by way of example of the manifestations of God coming into the affairs of man. But there's a specific pattern when I examine how they do it that I think we might well look at. First thing is that they time their intervention. They're very careful. Usually they pick the worst time of all, the darkest hour. That's when they come. When people are ready and they're open and they're hungry and they need to listen. Secondly, each of their interventions renews again the love affair between God and man. And it promotes a renewed vision of human potential. So there's again that issue of love. And so right away you're not only dealing with some sort of an idea dissemination, you're dealing with fundamental spiritual relationships between beings. And then the third one, it enlists the aid of selfless individuals. I think that's a very important one. Because I think if we want to carry off the sort of development that Dr. Arbab was talking about, that everybody really in development wants to have happen, we're going to have to become a different kind of development specialist, a different kind of intervener. We're going to have to become a pioneer in a very spiritual sense of that word. And that means a kind of humbling ourselves, a kind of detaching ourselves from high incomes and prestige and favorable sort of professional circumstances to such an extent that we're actually able to enter into a collaborative relationship with people. Fourthly, I think this intervention, the manifestations of God intervention, tends to always restate what has been learned before. It's built on a foundation of the base that society grew out of. All those things that were correct and good and positive that came from the past are restated and drawn out in the process of dialogue that the manifestation of God does with mankind. And upon that base, the intervention then is carried forward. Now, that means to me, as an interventionist, say, if I'm going to work with Indians in the North, I have to know who those people are, where they come from, how they frame their world, how they perceive themselves, what sort of story they think they're in, what vision they have for their children in the future. And I have to be able to bring into dialogue their understanding, their world, their story, with the story, the great story that Baha'u'llah tells to us. Bring those two things into dialogue. That's what the manifestation of God does. We're constantly asked to bring ourselves to account each day. Account of our actions, account of our beliefs. So I think that there's a specific sort of delicate balance that comes into play when we intervene in the affairs of people, where we must admit that they are a whole and good and viable living being that we're coming into a relationship with, and that if we expect them to change in that relationship, that we're going to have to take a risk and we're going to have to change too. We're going to have to humble ourselves to the extent that our whole history, our whole background, everything that we are up to this moment, also becomes a question. And entering into dialogue then, in that questioning stance between our worlds, is the only, as I see it, possible way to together co-intentionally create a world. The intervention of the manifestations of God is always catalytic. They don't come in with a hammer of Thor and bash us on the head and say, this is it, you're unified. And everybody walks around stunned but happy. The selfless souls have to transform themselves in relationship with God based on unity, based on the love of God, and then go forth into the world. And it takes an awful long time and an awful lot of energy. And I think there's again a clue for our intervention, that it has to be the kind of intervention that sets into motion processes but doesn't take it over. Finally, once the intervention is made, God doesn't leave us alone. There's a continual exchange of energy in this case, through the flow of the administrative order, through the revealed word that continues to guide, continues to aid people. And once we begin a process, we're like parenting a whole new stage in a people's development. We can't leave them alone. You don't leave children beside the road. Fourth principle, in those 5 principles that I named, is contract. Covenant is an agreement between participating parties. Each side agrees to do certain things. Well, I think that the one lesson that I take from my experiences overseas and in the North is that we, North American industrialized people, are just as underdeveloped as anybody else. And we have an awful lot to learn and a long way to go. And we need those people desperately, and we need our exchange with them just as much as they need us. And that our presence in working with people is just as much for our own benefit. I cannot progress spiritually or materially unless I am engaged in assisting others to progress. Something like 40% of my lifestyle, cut off the top 40% of my income, my house, my car, everything I do, is dependent on the poverty of other people. The material and spiritual well-being of the planet is all interconnected. And I think we need to be out front with the fact, as Baha'is, as interveners in the affairs of other people, that we have a lot to gain by intervening, by being with them. And that we're not there in a spirit of totally unalloyed altruism. That we're there because God wants us to be working together and because we all need it. People are very suspicious, and they have a right to be, I think, in poor countries, of strangers who come from rich countries who will put out nice words and nice programs, but live in very wealthy houses, and they come and they go. They have big salaries. Well, it's clear why they do it. The development establishment, it's clear why they're in the game. They're making a very comfortable living. Vastly disparate with the level of living of most of the people in the country. Well, somehow we have to transcend that. We have to get past that. And we have to... 5 minutes. I'm coming to the end, too. I'm doing good. We have to be able to establish, a contract, an agreement that makes the people that we're working with realize that we're not going to build them a hospital if we're not, that we're not going to give each eldest son in the family a scholarship to Harvard if we're not, but that we are going to do this and this and this, and we expect them to do that and that and that, and that we have a relationship with them, and we're there to try to work out that relationship. And that contract, that arrangement, I think, between peoples has to be up for negotiations all the time. Our presence there, our participation, the roles that we're playing. Maybe we're taking the process over too much. Maybe we're not allowing local leadership to come forth. There has to be avenues, and it seems to me that the local administrative bodies of the Baha'i faith are the perfect avenues, where people can openly express their feelings about our presence, our exchange with them. Finally, of the 5 principles, the last is vision. The term religion has a secular meaning today, as well as the religious one that we're familiar with. It oftentimes can refer to anything that people believe in. There's a bumper sticker that says, honk if you believe in anything. Eric Fromm wrote that the question is not one of religion or not religion, but of which kind of religion, whether it's one that furthers human development, the unfolding of specifically human powers, or one that paralyzes human growth. Well, religion, as I see it, is a kind of knowledge, a kind of relationship with God that provides a vision of latent human possibilities. And that vision draws us forward. draws us through time, and it gives us shape, it gives meaning, it gives goal to the endeavor that is the reconstitution of a world. That's what life is all about. Michael Novak wrote that when we look over our shoulder at the actions of our life, we can look back, we see a pattern, a traced out pattern that spells a story. And we can see what we believed in, what was important to us, what wasn't important to us, what we really took seriously in our lives. Well, without a vision to move forward to draw us out of our present thinking, our present doing patterns, it's very, very difficult for a people in a community, in a nation, to carry on a self-transformation process. That's the one thing that we have as Baha'is, is a vision of a whole new way of being on the planet, a whole new range of human possibilities. The writings are full. You could stand up here for hours and hours and read from the writings only of Shoghi Effendi of the new hope for humanity, of new possibilities. I'll read one short sentence. The enormous energy dissipated and wasted on war, whether economic or political, will be consecrated to such ends as will extend the range of human inventions and technical development, to the increase of the productivity of mankind, to the extermination of disease, to the extension of scientific research, to the raising the standard of physical health, and to the sharpening and refinement of the human brain. Now, just think of people who have 8 or 10 kids, and they only hope for 3 of them to make it to adulthood. Where, when I was in Haiti, I talked to a lady who didn't feed her kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays because she couldn't afford to do it. I saw women suckling pigs to get them ready for market. Barbara Ward, just before she died, said, "We are obviously in a position of deadlock, a miserable deadlock, without any ideas, without visions, without any sense of our mutual interests, and perhaps worst of all, without any moral convictions to sustain our governments or direct our purposes. And this is possibly the most dangerous situation in which human beings can find themselves, that we're a community without a vision." That's what we have, a vision. And I offer that we must hold aloft the vision that Baha'u'llah provides for what man is, for what man can be, for what we can be together. That emerging face that Jalil Shadam describes has been clearly painted in portrait by Baha'u'llah. And that vision must be held aloft. And that's what we have to offer the development establishment, above all the other things. We have on-the-ground community organization. We are able to generate unity between people. Not because we have good ideas, but because we have the Holy Spirit. We are able to get people to participate, to engage in their volition. Because inherent in love is opening the doors to let people be who they are. We are able to establish a kind of collaborative relationship. Because consultation in the Baha'i faith is a law, carrying on together in groups without the authority of one individual absconding away power and privilege. That's a way of being in Baha'i communities, and it is emerging. We are able to accept the kind of intervention in our affairs that not only the manifestations of God provide, but the institutions of our faith, the guidance of the House of Justice, the guidance of counselors. And this model can be passed on. We can learn a lot just from the carryings on of the Baha'i world order, of how in a very gentle, loving way we can parent a new way of being together in communities. And we do have a vision. And we should hold that vision aloft, because it's a very precious thing. I think that if we despiritualize our development efforts as Baha'is, if we try to imitate what all the other guys are doing, well, then we're going to have the results that all the other guys are having. After 30 years of 3 development decades, they're still looking around for a vision. And they're beginning to look to people like us because we have one. I think that we need to capitalize on the very precious gifts that Baha'u'llah has given us, the foundation processes by which genuine human transformation can take place. And I think these processes have been given to us in model form, from age to age, in the intervention of human affairs, by the coming of the manifestations of God.